Common literally told you there was a disclaimer in his video. Heck, not even 2 seconds ago. Doodle had it on screen.
You know, I don't think this video's fun enough to cover solo. I need some help here. Hello?
Hey, Luckster. Ah!
Did I call it a bad time?
Oh, no. I'm actually, I don't know. Ever since I found this video I wanted to cover, everything's been glitching out on my end. My computer, my avatar, even my phone calls aren't that stable.
Oh dear. Hello?
It's me again. Look, maybe I should call you back after I do something with this video on Neko Koda. Maybe that'll fix something?
Wait, is this the one on Doodle?
Yeah, how did you guess?
Well, boy, do I have a proposition for you!
Wait, how did you get in here?
So for those who don't really follow SCC drama, and to be honest I don't blame you, Doodletones is a slideshow commentator who makes a countdown every Christmas about what she believes to be the worst commentaries of the year. And her number 8 entry included a commentary from another commentator called Neko Koda, which was covering a video from a well-known independent commentator called Manga Common who was poking fun at a YouTuber called The Orchard for a now-deleted Twitter thread where she gave some writing advice that the internet didn't particularly like.
As in, interesting little Christmas present. Neko Koda uploaded a 9-minute commentary mere hours later that aimed at said entry to Doodle's naughty list. Another commentator named Umbrus made a response to Koda's video a day after, and now Luckster and I are here to tackle both Umbrus and Koda.
Now with that said, it's only fair to mention that Koda has currently unlisted her video on Doodle and has stated on Twitter that she's going to be taking a break from response commentaries.
However, her reasons for doing so are more because of the video's negative reception, and not necessarily because of the criticism given at the time. So I'd say there is still ample opportunity to give our 2 cents to Koda in particular.
Post-production point. So after we finished the script on Koda and Umbrus, we found out that not only did Koda delete her video on Doodle, but every other video on her channel as well, so she's not too happy with how her more recent commentaries turned out. And she wants to get away from all the negativity on the internet.
I'm not happy with the content I'm making. I'm not happy with all the infighting that's been going on. I'm not happy with any of the drama that's been going on. I don't like turning on Twitter and being like, this person's a pedophile or groomer, this is this, or this person's this. Well, shut the fuck up.
That said, there's a bit more context to the situation, which has me looking at this with a much more stringent eye, and I have problems with the reasons she gave, especially when you look at them within the context of her video on Doodle, but I'll save that for later in the video. With that out of the way...
And even if she isn't willing to take what we have to say in mind, others hopefully can.
And even then, since we're covering Umbrus as well, it only makes sense to cover both of them since Koda's points are an important part of this degree chain. So with that out of the way, let's get—
Now let the tomfoolery commence!
Oh, I didn't know the Knight's Honor included a sense of humor.
But of course. As written in the Merriment Statute depicted in Article 7, page 150.
What's up? I'm gonna keep this short and sweet, because honestly, this is a video I kind of want to respond to, and also kind of feel like I have to, mostly because of how many just blatant lies there are in this video, and how much misconstruing was done in this video. And given that this person has a lot more subscribers than me, I honestly, part of me feels like I need to give some sort of response to this.
Yeah, 14,000 subs, even though most of her videos tend to get around 1,000 to 5,000 views. You know, much like your own content. I'm bringing this up because you seem to be giving the impression that this is some much bigger YouTuber coming down on you, when in actuality your videos have about an equal amount of reach to people. You could maybe argue that she's a big deal in the slideshow commentary community, but given how small that community is, that's really not saying much, since literally the only other slideshow commentator that's more popular than Doodle at this point is Ponder Sprocket, while even the bigger names in this community struggle to get over 1,000 subs.
I'd like to draw attention to how Koda refers to Doodle's statements as blatant lies, since that sets a rather nasty tone throughout her video. This is more than simply stating, this part of her video is bad and I'll show you why, as you are outright telling the audience what to expect.
On that note, did you hear the part where Koda said she felt like she had to make this video? Well, I'd like to cross-reference that with her goodbye video, since,
My videos, I haven't had fun making any of my most recent videos. They were, like, unscripted, rushed, boring. I didn't even like them. I put them out because I felt like I had to.
Yeah, this is why I'm kind of skeptical on her reasons for leaving, since the only fault she admits to is rushing out her videos. Meanwhile, she's still painting this picture that there's all some big bad shadow coming down on her, as opposed to, oh, I don't know, a commentator explaining why they don't like someone's video, which is something that commentators typically tend to do.
To put it bluntly, we call this poisoning the well, and we haven't even gotten a drink.
Yeah, between both of these statements, this honestly sets a nasty tone for Koda's video, since it's already making Doodle out to be the villain. Though speaking of poor first impressions, let's move on to Umbrus's intro statements.
Anyway, this is Neko Koda. She's a commentator who exists, I guess. She made a video on Doodle's top 10 worst commentaries of 2020. I was on that list as, I believe, the number 2 entry. I don't remember. But yeah, she covered her part. She covered Doodle's part on her and Deviant Crow's video on Manga Common. This shouldn't be too confusing to follow, or at least I hope. I don't know, I just want to get back to Kingdom Hearts 3. I don't have much to say about this video in general, so I didn't really put my mind to it.
So, if you're noticing a pattern here, both of the main degrees we're covering basically rushed out their videos within the span of a day, and as a byproduct of that, this resulted in 2 videos that feel very rambly and unfocused. Though I'd argue Umbrus is worse in this aspect, since at least Koda was able to get her points across clearly, while Umbrus's points tend to be vague and worded very awkwardly. Like, Umbrus, you're supposed to be giving context here, but you keep going off topic by mentioning how you were also on Doodle's list, how you just want to play Kingdom Hearts 3, and how you keep stumbling between your lines.
Let's not forget the pauses and retakes left on Umbrus's end, or how Umbrus merely names the people in this degree chain, but not what their videos are about. There's poisoning the well, and now there's no water at all? Excuseth me?
Let me give you the context. Meet Doodle Tones. She's a commentator with 14,000 subscribers and pretty sizable platform. Every year, her and a bunch of other commentators make these top 10 worst commentaries of 2020 lists. Personally, I used to kind of enjoy them, but nowadays I just see them as rather pointless, honestly. It really does nothing other than just pointing at people and say, hey, your video was one of the worst, and honestly, it could be kind of disheartening for some people. But whatever.
I mean, that's not really what these lists focus on. Using Doodle's list as a primary example, she begins and ends the video off with tangents about what went wrong during the year. The only notable exceptions are her 2016 and 2018 lists, but for the rest of them, she mainly talks about the things that we can improve on going into the new year. As for the lists themselves, she mainly talks about her issues with the videos while still giving advice to the people she's talking about. The only people I can see get upset over being on the list are overly sensitive people, though that's just me.
There's quite a bit to unpack here. Firstly, the year-end countdowns do mainly focus on what went wrong in the entries, so Koda isn't entirely wrong in saying that. She's wrong about them being pointless, since as you've demonstrated, they can still give advice and point out problems in the community. But Koda's not wrong about how they can be disheartening.
Honestly, I wouldn't even say Umbrus demonstrated it well, because she provides no evidence for anything she said. She doesn't show any clips from Doodle's countdowns to back up her point about how Doodle uses these lists to sum up issues that she had with the community this year. Don't get me wrong, these clips do exist, but as the presenter, you should be providing evidence to back up your claim, not helping that some of these statements are technically wrong. Doodle's 2016 and 2018 lists did have her summarizing what she thought of the year.
That said, commentaries have probably been the worst part about this year for me, and surprisingly it's not because of the controversies I started that caused me on numerous occasions to wanting to do something drastic. I grant you those didn't help. No, the worst part about commentaries for me are all the really bad ones I had stumbled across during this year. Whether it was ones I covered or not, it just kind of killed me inside stumbling across some of these videos and knowing that there are people who legitimately stood behind these ideas. However, while I can say the community as a whole, minus the hiccups, was mostly okay, you look at individual commentators this year and a truly staggering realization at the lows of this year start to pop up. To say the very least, some of us got a little sloppy.
So regardless, this is still sloppy on your end.
Secondly, the only people I can see getting upset over being on the list are oversensitive people? This is just an indirect way of saying Koda was being overly sensitive. And while I may admittedly second that notion as we continue, this was a terrible way of addressing it. Nothing of substance was gleamed on with this statement, and it ignores the idea of someone simply finding something inaccurate and wanting to address them accordingly.
Anyway, we're going to be skipping the next point since it was just Koda saying that she was confused about why she was on the list.
She didn't put my video on Manga Common on the list. She kind of like said she was going to, but then put Deviant Crows on the list, and like, I don't know, it was very confusing.
And then Umbrus explains why she was mentioned.
She did put you on the list, actually. Sure, it was in the form of an honorable mention, but you were still on the list.
And if it was just that point, then this would be fine, but then Umbrus would bounce off this for her next point.
The doctor pondered this a while, sat back and scratched his scalp, then said,
She did still make some points against me and Deviant Crow, and I'm gonna only be covering the part with my video, because that's what I feel I need to respond to. If Deviant Crow wants to respond for her section, she's free to, but I just want to cover my section.
So you do acknowledge that you were mentioned in the entry. Funny.
Yeah, Koda did acknowledge that she was mentioned. Why does this matter? Koda's point was that she was confused as to why she was mentioned on Doodle's list in the first place. Sure, she didn't understand why, and explaining that is fair, but Koda wasn't ignoring the fact she was mentioned, so you bringing up her acknowledgement of it does nothing.
Also, just to get this out of the way, Doodle's point of contention throughout the list is that you and Crow make very similar points to each other, and just cutting out Crow's parts entirely makes Doodle's point of contention meaningless.
Actually, no. Doodle had the same issues with both videos. It just so happened that Crow's video had the slight edge in the vitriol she displayed.
Ultimately, I had a problem deciding between the two to put on this list and was probably just going to wind up making another 2-entry segment that covers the same video, but then Crow decided that it was a good idea to antagonize Common at the end of her video because of an albeit childish reaction Common had in retaliation towards Crow saying that they were going to cover Common.
There is no point of contention when Koda responded to her own segment in particular, because she is specifically talking about why Doodle mentioned Koda's video in the first place. She thinks it shouldn't have been acknowledged in a negative light, and thus she is here to debate why.
Yeah, this comedy point doesn't sit well with me. I fail to see how this is a comedy video at all. It's the same as your other commentaries. You make points and crack a few jokes.
Now, on its own, this skepticism wouldn't inherently be a problem. I too have seen my fair share of people hiding behind the guise of a joke video when they're called out for making shit points. This happens, and to be honest, it's arguably happened with Common in the past when I made my unofficial one-shot on him a couple years ago. I will also say that there is definitely something to be said about these jokes possibly having points behind them. It is very much possible to make a point in a joking manner that can still be critiqued or debated if the reasoning behind them is flawed. To be honest, this isn't what I take issue with in these videos. If that was the only thing to their skepticism, I wouldn't have even thought to put them on my list. But it's how both Neko Koda and Deviant Crow look at Common explicitly saying this video was done with the intent to be humorous, and act as if this is just him shielding himself from criticism that I take issue with.
I mean, we could ignore the fact that he literally did do that.
Common literally told you there was a disclaimer in his video. Heck, not even 2 seconds ago, Doodle had it on screen. What was this supposed to disprove?
It was meant to prove that Common is using the disclaimer as a shield to hide from criticism, since when Koda said the points from Common were flawed, Common responded by saying, "Oh my gosh, this is all a joke, why are you taking it seriously?" when he was making a lot of serious points in that video.
Now, to be fair to Lily, there are actually some good tips here for writing. I mean, some of them come off as...
Tip number 7. Twitter is not an appropriate place to reveal story details. The appropriate place is in the work itself. Don't sexualize teenage characters.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
But they are still good tips, and as I said before, one of the worst things that a writer can do is explain things that are important in the story and supplemental material, or dare I say, done at conventions.
Now granted, all Koda did was go, "Oh, the points here were flawed," without mentioning any specific instances of the jokes being used to push a point, so it's not like Common's response is totally unwarranted, since Koda wasn't even entertaining the idea that the video was meant to be humorous, which ironically was Doodle's point to begin with. However, just pointing to the disclaimer does nothing to Koda's argument, since she clearly had a problem with that disclaimer as well.
But let's, for the sake of argument, just ignore that. What other possible conclusion could I come to? Look, you make a video that's the same as your other videos, except this one's labeled as a joke video. What other conclusion, other than he's trying to shield himself from criticism, could I possibly come to? Please, I would love to hear it, because I can't think of honestly any other possibility for this.
In the description it says that he mainly made the video to riff on the Twitter thread. You did not get confirmation that Common didn't want his video to be taken completely seriously until after he left a comment on your response to it. So the idea of allowing some seriousness in response to his video was still up in the air. There's also the idea that riffing on those tweets would be fun for Common. The video was made for comedy, but that does not entail that he can't also be serious. Even more so that it doesn't entail that you can't criticize the jokes, or the points in it.
In short, just because the video is labeled as a joke video, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any actual criticism in it. It just means that the main purpose of this video is to be entertaining as opposed to informative.
Well, instead of assuming Common's intent, you could, I don't know, play along with the joke. I actually made a video similar to Common's video at one point. Anyone here remember episode 13? Yeah, that was a joke video. The joke was that people would take it seriously, and well, someone made a full-fledged video on it. That's now gone, which I'm happy about, but details. It is possible to make a joke video that may seem serious unless stated otherwise. How do you have such a hard time understanding this?
What? What was this commentary on the joke video? Why is it being deleted a good thing? Why are you referencing a commentary that isn't public on your channel and has to be dug up through your 2019 playlist? You've just thrown so many vague details at us that most people who weren't in the commentary community in 2019 would have no context for.
Wait a minute, let me see that. Debating with a disembodied voice? A self-commentary about a twitlonger you made saying you'd leave the CC? Addressing conflictions with treating real-life conversations as arguments? Sweet Lord and Heavenly Donuts, this is just a ripoff of Digital Ty's closing bracket! The difference here is that his video came out before yours, and it was not made as a joke. If your copying of the closing bracket was a joke, none of us are laughing. This can be considered an insult with how blatant you parrot someone else's emotional stress. The fact that your video has been disowned makes it an even worse example, because it shows that whatever joke you were going for did not end in your favor. On top of all that, the joke in Common's video was not that it would be taken seriously. His disclaimer and the reply to Koda's video explicitly states that was not something he wanted people to do.
Exactly, since if the joke is that it should be taken seriously, wouldn't that incentivize people to take it seriously since they can't tell whether or not it's a joke? Not helping that with the video in question, you outright try to convince people that you leaving the community wasn't a joke.
I am done with the CC.
And, well, as we'll see later, this sounds half-assed, and people would not believe it, since, funnily enough, you posted it on April Fool's Day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, as you can make serious content on that day, such as this one. People will likely not believe you. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny or anything, but it was the second in my time zone. I had zero intent to make this an April Fool's prank.
You can't say that people should just go along with the joke when you're purposely making it so that they can't tell if it was a joke or not.
Oh yeah, they also both say that cancel culture isn't real because it doesn't completely off the careers of people.
Pyrocynical was accused of sending sexual DMs to a minor, and the allegations were basically proven true. And we still have commentators who make mental gymnastics in order to try to say he's innocent. Cancel culture my ass!
Cyberbullying isn't real, just turn off the fucking monitor.
14,000 subscribers, and the best joke you could have made against me was bringing up a video that I uploaded in 2017 and have repeatedly, many times, disagreed with and disowned and said that the point was stupid and the video was stupid. And that was the absolute best joke you could have made there. I'm not even mad, I'm honestly just disappointed.
Why are you acting like this reference didn't have a point behind it?
The reference to the final shot was to show that this is an issue you've repeated from your days as the dark commentator. The fact that you've heavily disowned such an old video makes this even worse, as you've stated this argument of disregarding online harassment, despite said harassment yielding deplorable actions and dangerous results, is a claim you don't want to repeat, yet you did anyway in your video on Common.
Now sure, you later go on to say that you weren't saying cancel culture isn't real, and you were just saying cancel culture isn't a big problem, and we'll have more to say on that when we get there. But the problem is, both of these points operate on the same thread of logic. Since you're still downplaying the idea that hordes of people gathering together to chase people off the internet isn't a big deal.
Now sure, cancel culture isn't inherently cyberbullying, since there are people that deserve to be cancelled, as we'll see later. But as Doodle will also bring up, there have been many instances where the examples were either overblown or downright fabricated. So to downplay the amount of times where people get chased off the internet is still you making a similar mistake.
1. Why is her having 14k subscribers relevant? This comes off as you put arbitrary standards onto people because of the size of their audience. And B, as much as I hate to explain the joke, Doodle's joke is that you basically said cancel culture doesn't exist, and Doodle is making the joke about how you once said cyberbullying isn't real. The joke makes sense when you think about it.
Let's kill the whole
And Umbrus cut out context, with no timestamp or explanation as to what was skipped over. Because remember how I brought up how Koda said that cancel culture was mostly a non-issue as opposed to just not being real at all? Well, that was in the part Umbrus skipped over.
I never said that cancel culture was perfect. I never said that nobody ever gets falsely canceled. That doesn't even argue my point. I said that most of the time, it's people being called out for misusing their platform.
Sure, it's still semantics argument, since whether or not you're saying something isn't real or something isn't a big deal, it still shows you're downplaying the issue, but instead of arguing that, you just cut out the main part of Koda's argument and don't bother to address Koda's actual issue with Doodle's point.
That being said, we'll restore what Umbra skipped and cover that as well, because boy do we have our own issues with this argument.
Which, I'm sorry, that's hella toxic, because I can point to a number of people who were unjustly cancelled and only got out of the hot seat once someone else spoke up in favor.
Yeah, we're just gonna skip this whole section. She brings up other kinds of people who have been cancelled unjustly, and my point was that most of the time, cancel culture is just people making either really bad takes or misusing their platform, and most of the time, people just want an apology. I never said that cancel culture was perfect. I never said that nobody ever gets falsely cancelled. That doesn't even argue my point. I said that most of the time, it's people being called out for misusing their platform. Do people get unjustly cancelled? Yes. Yes, they do. My keyword in the video was most of the time. Let me say that again. Most of the time, it's just people misusing their platform. Most of the time, the people being canceled are people who had really bad takes and were called out for it. When someone is canceled, it demonstrates that they are misusing their platform and shouldn't have it. Most of the time, Most of the time.
I mean, if we're going to cherry pick wording, I could bring up how you said when someone is cancelled, it shows that they don't deserve their platform, and not, you know, the possibility of said drama being overblown or fabricated, or how you ended the segment off with
cancel culture my ass!
Which, well, if that wasn't implying the issue doesn't exist, it still shows you were wildly downplaying the effect it can have on people. Or if you want to look at the full context of the statement, Koda, do you remember how the statement you were defending outright said cancel culture isn't real? So regardless of whether or not you said most of the time, you were still defending the idea that cancel culture isn't real. Even then, I watched that segment, and that most of the time line is literally the only instance where you give any benefit of the doubt that cancel culture is anything more than people getting called out for misusing their platform. The rest of your point was just you listing off names of high-profile internet content creators that were able to shrug it off and act like it's not a problem for people overall.
When someone is cancelled, it demonstrates that they are misusing their platform and shouldn't have it. Let's take an example of someone who was cancelled. Kevin Hart was someone who was supposed to host the 2018 Oscar Awards. People then found a bunch of very old homophobic jokes he made back in 2009, which included talks about beating his child if he was gay. He was simply asked to apologize, but refused and stood by his comments. After the backlash continued, he chose to step down from hosting the Oscars. In this and most cases, people just want an apology, but are never given it. Even then, Kevin Hart still has a career despite this. Another example is PewDiePie, who made anti-Semitic jokes, said the N-word on stream, and got cancelled for it. And to this day, is still one of the biggest YouTubers on the platform. Need more? Jeffree Star, Toddy Westbrook, and Shane Dawson all accused of vile shit that you probably know all about, yet all of them still have huge platforms.
If you brought up some counter-arguments to your point of people who did lose their platform due to cancel culture, well, you'd still be glossing over how cancel culture has ruined people's lives because politicians and big internet celebrities don't magically disappear the instant something comes to light, but at the very least it would give the impression you don't think this issue is entirely black and white.
I'd like to bring up how most of these people were extremely popular content creators who have the clout and resources to just ignore the controversy and act like nothing happened, instead of smaller content creators who aren't in a position to lose even a fraction of their following. Doodle herself brought up Blueborg16, Slimmers, ZFix's art, and SpockerTech as examples of smaller content creators, people who either lost their platforms or are in danger of doing so. Yet you were specifically focusing on the well-off people who were able to shrug it off. And even high-profile personnel aren't safe, since Doodle also brought up plenty of examples of big names who are in danger of losing their platforms too.
Blueborg16 was straight up hacked and had their Twitter account deleted before they got a chance to speak up. The Madame situation happened, like she tried canceling a smaller artist called Slimmers, and I'm sorry, does SpockerTech just not exist to you two? ZFix's art, as much as their behavior was less than desirable, had a similar thing happen to them that Blueborg did, where they were just hacked before potential redemption. Then there's the famous examples of James Charles, Pro, Jared, and Slazo. All three bled subscribers until they spoke out about their accusations being fabricated, and even then Jared hasn't exactly come back with a full recovery.
And with that in mind, Doodle's examples do argue against your point, since if there are many examples of people who either lost or were in danger of losing their platform, then that would still go against your point about how it's not an issue most of the time, since it's been shown to happen to people time and time again.
Regardless, let's not forget that this mention of cancel culture isn't real was first coined in this agree chain as one of many writing tips. Lily's Twitter thread, or anyone else's writing advice for that matter, are made with the intent to help anyone willing to write a story, not just the Jimmy Kimmels or Markipliers of the world who already have a large semblance of notoriety to their name. By paying no heed to the people with smaller followings that have been negatively affected through cancel culture, that ignores a serious danger that everyone should best avoid. There is no limit to who can write a story or take the advice for writing one, which would mean filtering your examples to just the big names that have failed to be cancelled is a logical fallacy of the utmost degree. Lily's tweet never specified any bigger names and only spoke in general terms, while you claim to have been speaking generally in your earlier contribution to this chain, yet only brought up how bigger names survived getting cancelled. And by not mentioning the smaller targets of cancel culture, that underplays how serious it can be. I don't care if it's the exception to the more popular examples. The fact smaller creators have been successfully and unjustly cancelled is a danger everyone shouldn't ignore. You said you were trying to stray away from the dark era, right? Because this is not how you stray away from the dark era.
I'm not gonna let you get away with the I don't know them guys with me, Koda.
However, I found a video by this one user named Toganium. I don't know. Okay, this is fucking hilarious to me because I can hear it in Susie's voice that she thinks she has some sort of gotcha on me, like, haha, I'm not gonna let you do this to me, blah blah blah. And my whole thing was just, I didn't know how to pronounce Toganium's name properly. That's all I was saying. You thought you had such a gotcha on me. I can hear it in your voice. You thought you had such a gotcha. When it was just about me not knowing how to pronounce someone's name. I'm not trying to be an asshole here.
You're failing. Also, let's not pretend that you haven't tried to pull this before.
You all make the same points and it wasn't needed. Oh, but that's just one time. Really? Dark Commentator bandwagon. 5 videos, all the same points. This is just really funny to me.
Oh no, that isn't all, Koda. In the clip Doodle showed, it seemed like you knew who you were talking about, only to shrug it off with an, I don't know. Like, Toganium isn't even that hard of a name to pronounce, and if it was, you could have just rehearsed it before recording.
A lot of this is on shaky ground. For starters, what you might find easy to pronounce will not be the same for everyone else. Without knowing firsthand, one could assume the name is pronounced as either Toganium or Toganium.
Secondly, you're saying that Koda should have practiced pronouncing the name, but how can she practice pronouncing something if she doesn't know how it's said to begin with? That's like asking me to practice the saxophone when I don't know how to read the notes or play the instrument at all.
Thirdly, Toganium is not the same name as Dwebly. Koda may be aware of Dwebly through their time in the CC, but that doesn't mean she would know that Dwebly now went by a different alias.
Finally, you said that Koda acted like she knew Toga but then shrugged it off, but in that statement, Koda literally never gave any indication that she knew Toga. In fact, that was Doodle's main point here, that she was acting like they never met before now.
Now one may look at me and say, Ollie, is this you trying to overanalyze something to make someone look bad again? And normally I'd say maybe, but if you sat down and watched Koda's video on Toga, and knowing of Toga's past, it will become painfully clear what Koda was intending when making the video. At the start of the video, she poisoned the well, calling Toga's video one of the worst videos ever done on her, and she had the gall to act like she didn't know who Toga was in her commentary. Even afterwards, she has a strange bias towards Toga. In the comments of this very video I'm covering, you make a snarky remark towards Toga, which you do multiple times in other videos to him. Every time Toga breathes in your presence, you have to act snarky towards him.
Are we going to see any clips of Koda saying these things in her videos? Are we going to see any screenshots of these condescending comments that Koda made towards Toga? Or literally any piece of evidence to rely on that isn't just your word? The most you do is link Koda's video on Toga in the description, but even then, your audience should not have to go out of their way to fact check your claims. That's supposed to be your responsibility as the presenter. But aside from that, I'm asking what any of this has to do with the original point. Even if we take your word for it and believe that Koda poisoned the well and acts condescending towards Toga in the comment section, what does that have to do with Doodle's original point about how Koda is acting like she doesn't know anyone in the SCC?
And the biggest hole in your argument is that Koda could have just thought Toga's video was that bad. No previous experience with them is necessary to pour salt. A bad argument is a bad argument regardless of who says it, and what Koda saw as flawed points seemed to be reason enough. Now, that doesn't get rid of how Koda never directly stated she doesn't know Toga, but you argued that Koda remembers who Toganium is despite acting otherwise from your point of view.
Anyways, after this, Umbrus goes into her final thoughts. However, she also skips over the last few points Koda makes towards Doodle, and as you could have guessed, we still have issues with them. So we're heading back to Degree 4 for now.
Other cinematic parallels between the two videos include ignoring how genre shifts and tonal shifts can be one of the same by trying to specify what Orchard was talking about as one and not the other, and then ignoring how common specifies the problem should therein lie within the context of how it's being used and not what's being done.
What the fuck are you even trying to argue at this point? Like, this is such a word salad? I have no clue what you're honestly saying. Like, again, I'm not trying to be mean here. I just don't know what you're trying to argue here.
Forgive me if this sounds rude, but considering that your video was made the day after Doodle's list came out, and the fact you clearly sound tired, I'm more inclined to believe that this is an issue with you rushing out the video and not taking the time to understand what she's saying.
If you need a more concise way of putting it, you and Crow ignored how shifts in genre or tone can be one and the same, and that the execution of said shifts are what make them good or bad. They are not inherently flawed like Lily may have you believe.
But the point was that Lily was saying that if your show starts off as one genre, you can't drastically change it to another. You can have elements of the other. So for example, let's take Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is an action adventure show. If it had comedy elements, that's completely fine. But let's say all of a sudden, one episode, Game of Thrones completely changed to start being Family Guy, for example. That would be kind of fucking shit, because you can't change the whole genre of a show on a whim.
That's actually not what she means by that. I know, because as somebody who watches Lily's content from time to time, I can tell you her problem isn't with a show drastically changing the tone for one episode, but it's actually with comedic children's shows gradually getting more and more serious in order to appeal to a wider audience. Or in other words, serialization, and this is something that she's gone on record saying in several of her videos.
It's all the same usual boring crap, augmented by the fact that the cast changes from one boring fuckhead and their two funny friends to one boring fuckhead and three other boring fuckheads. That's actually the part that annoys me the most. The most entertaining characters in the show are actually Lotte and Susie, and they get completely shafted in favor of the two teachers who can't get a sentence out without delays and Sunset Shimmer's a lowland form. After 10 years of watching what was once a cute, fun, easygoing cartoon about tiny horse puppies being friends turn into a pit of wasted world building and gloomy melodrama, I find myself ruminating on My Little Pony's slide down into the spiked pit of edgy man-children fantasy adventure show. This is why shows like The Loud House, Teen Titans Go, Hilda, and DC Superhero Girls tend to slant more toward overt comedy and don't take themselves very seriously, because they're made by people who know why the old shows of the 90s we all got hooked on got so popular, because they actually made them. Like any other narrative tool, serialization works very well when it's appropriate to the story. It's very easy to just say that shows with a continuous overarching plot are always better than a monster of the week, but that's just flat out not true, and it's most evident in shows that try to have it both ways. But regardless of what narrative tool you decide to use for your show, you do have to pick one.
Lest we forget Lily's wording in the tweet, nothing here says that a change is allowed to be gradual or have elements of other genres sprinkled in. She has painted a clear picture with a broad brush that you have strawmanned.
So between the original tweet's wording and what she said in her own videos, your point is nothing more than a straw man of what Lily was saying.
And it's not the same as a tone change. A genre change and a tone change are two completely different things.
How so? Actually, that's not fair of me to demand an explanation, since that would imply the difference matters in the first place. Because when a show changes its genre from a comedy to a drama, the tone changes as well. Since comedies don't tend to take themselves seriously and focus on, well, the comedy, while dramas do tend to take themselves seriously since they're focusing on the drama. And if a comedy show gradually turns into a melodrama, then the lighthearted tone is going to change to a darker one. So regardless, this distinction doesn't do anything to Common's point about how it's all dependent on the execution.
Stretching to defend Lily from the goblins are anti-Semitic point by using J.K. Rowling, everyone's favorite TERF, as an example of how goblins inherently are anti-Semitic.
No, that is not the point I was making at fucking all. My point was that Common basically wrote off the whole goblins are anti-Semitic with, oh, I knew one show that had a nice goblin in it, so goblins aren't anti-Semitic.
Not to mention, there are also times where goblins are actually portrayed to be wholesome. Like that time I got reincarnated into a slime has some wholesome goblins.
I was criticizing Common for taking the easy way out with an argument he didn't understand. My point was that Common, at the very least, could have done a bit of research to find out where this stereotype comes from and what the points are behind it and try to argue that. I even criticized Lily for not properly arguing this in the video. Lily, you gotta elaborate more on this, at least a little bit. A blanket statement like that isn't really a great tip, and at the end of the day, it won't be really helpful in the long run. You, Common, you barely address the root claims that goblins are anti-Semitic. I know Lily doesn't elaborate, but you could have at least done a little bit of research. Like here, I found an article that states that goblins in Harry Potter share a lot of traits with offensive Jewish stereotypes. Is this the root of Lily's claim? I don't know, but at least I tried to figure it out, and Common didn't.
In the name of the great bakery in the sky, cease! For one, Lily stated that goblins are inherently anti-Semitic. Common's example is an anime with goblins that are written opposed to that stereotype. Thus, Lily's statement is invalid from the word go. But I meant that goblins were originally made based on this prejudice, so his example means nothing here. Well, in that case, your example is just as bad, because J.K. Rowling was not the first person to create the concept of goblins. Last I checked, the year 1997 was not during the 14th century. I can even take stories from that time period to prove Lily's claim as faulty. Hobgoblins are generally friendly most of the time, and pranksters at their worst. Brownies help with cleaning houses in exchange for food and lodging. There's a story literally called The Benevolent Goblin, who aids thirsty travelers that are lost in the woods. All of these are inherently good-natured. What's more is that describing goblins as inherently anti-Semitic is inherently flawed. Inherent means it is permanent, essential, or in some way characteristic. This word alone makes her tip extra strict and rigid enough to be broken with a mere thought because of it. Just write a race of goblins that aren't this stereotype.
Even then, you never really argued against Lily's claim that goblins are inherently anti-Semitic. Your only point against Lily was... Explain! And never touched on whether her initial claim was right or wrong. You just said, I don't know if goblins are inherently anti-Semitic, but Common could have done better. Oh, which, by the way, for someone who wants to criticize Common for taking the easy way out, you sure didn't do any legwork to state whether or not Lily's statement was right overall. And the only evidence you brought up was an article that used a 90s take on goblins that you said could feed into Lily's idea that goblins were inherently anti-Semitic, thus giving credence to Lily's statement. Sure, you may not have outright said they were inherently anti-Semitic, but you entertained the idea that it is, and don't actually argue against it. So again, this is nothing more than semantics that changes little about Doodle's overall point.
And I just brought up one article as an example of, oh, this is somebody else making the argument who actually elaborates on it. Is this the root claim? I don't know, but hey, I was showing that Common could have at the very least done a bit more research to try to understand it better, rather than taking the lazy way out of, I saw one nice goblin, so that's not true.
The fact that you didn't know and didn't do further research is why this is a double standard, you cat person!
Really? Cat person? That's the best you came up with?
I ran out of steam from the goblin talk.
I make this blatantly clear in my original video. But, guess who cuts out the context of me explaining all this? You barely addressed the root claims that goblins are anti-Semitic. I know Lily doesn't elaborate, but you could have at least done a little bit of research. Like here, I found an article that states that goblins and Harry Potter share a lot of traits with offensive Jewish stereotype.
Ultimately, ignoring how Common's point was that the problem stems from those who made the connection to begin with.
So it's not the writer's fault for writing in a blatant offensive stereotype. It's the reader's fault and the people who pointed it out's fault for pointing it out. That doesn't make any sense at all. That's basically all I wanted to cover.
Oh, so soon? Because there was a part of Doodle's point you cut out.
Never mind, I got a second one going. And it's context flavored.
Stretching to defend Lily from the goblins are anti-Semitic point by using J.K. Rowling, everyone's favorite TERF, as an example of how goblins inherently are anti-Semitic, ignoring how Common's point was that the problem stems from those who made the connection to begin with.
Yeah, some of these tips are kind of parodying some borderline offensive stuff like the whole Goblin Slayer thing that happened a few years back. And in all honesty, it's kind of insulting to instantly attribute a fictional race to monsters to an actual religious group. Like, honestly, the only people who ever made that connection were the people who made it a problem to begin with.
Now, both of these issues have their own issues, with Crow saying that traditional goblins are anti-Semitic because of J.K. Rowling's more modern take on them, and Koda straight up cites a source that say they might not be intentionally so, thus falling under Common's umbrella of those making the connection to begin with being the problem.
Oh, look, she elaborated on that point and said that the fact your source stated they might not be inherently anti-Semitic would fit into Common's original argument that people like Lily were grasping for straws and making something that wasn't an issue, an issue.
What's this? Koda taking Doodle out of context? The irony, it hits like a truck. I said it hits like a truck. Furthermore, this isn't Doodle stating she agreed with Common's statement of who made the mountain where, as she went on to detail why you didn't debunk him. It was context for the argument you failed to tackle.
But let's say that she did agree with Common's statement. That still doesn't change Doodle's point was about how Koda did nothing but feed into Common's original argument, so her retroactively arguing it now doesn't change Doodle's point.
Ah, please tell me this is over.
Well, that was the last point Koda made.
Alrighty, let's...
We still have Umbrus's final thoughts to cover.
What? Okay. This'll be fine. Well, what's the worst that could happen?
Which leads me to my final thoughts. I could literally care less about the rest of the video, but I just want to get this off my chest. So, Koda, I have a bit to say to you. Alright, so after you made your CC rant, I noticed you were starting to become homies with some people in the CC again, which was nice. However, that quickly wore off as soon as you continued to act vindictive towards us, and towards the end of the year, it became painfully apparent. This mainly started when you stopped using Neko Shadows as stills just because of an albeit tasteless joke on Luckster's video on you. Instead of understanding that the joke came out the wrong way, you took the childish route of looking for a new artist not too long after she made that comment.
Oh no.
Oh, I love it when people talk about interpersonal drama with no evidence, especially when they use it to call the person in question childish. I know I've harped on Umbrus for this a lot, but it's particularly bad here since it's not just her possibly missing a detail for a point, but outright calling Koda out on behavior that her audience has no frame of reference for. Now don't get us wrong, this stuff did happen. I can confirm that as someone who was basically in the middle of it. But regardless, if you're going to criticize someone for how they're acting, you need to show proof of them doing it, since as is, there's no reason for anyone watching this to believe that it actually happened.
Then you started responding to videos made on you, which isn't inherently wrong. I've certainly done it before, but you do it way too quickly. This video was uploaded not even a day after Doodles' list went live, and you made your video on Toga 2 days after his video. You need to stop rushing into situations too quickly. Anyone who remembers episode 28 knows that responding to a video on you too quickly is a really dumb idea.
Then why are you here? You uploaded your video a day after Koda's went up, and it is also riddled with flaws.
Hypocrisy may not make you wrong, but double standards sure do, since it begs the question, why is it okay for you to do it, but not Koda?
You can even hear by the tone of her voice that she just woke up and decided to record a video with no script. And before anyone says I sound the same, I've tried to sound loud. It's just that my voice just doesn't want to work.
That's not the only thing I'd say about your audio.
Even ignoring how this is still a problem with your video as well, if you're worried about sounding too quiet, you can always lower the volume of your background music or raise the volume of your lines in your editor. I know we both have Vegas after all, so that's something you should be able to do for future videos.
I know you are better than this, Koda. I really do. Though I have an overall thing I want to say. It seems like you want to stray away from the CC, which is fine, but you keep coming back to us every chance you get. And it's not even just you wanting to be friends with people, like, you're allowed to do that when you want to stay away from our community. But
Every time you come back to us, it's never in a good way. If you keep doing this, you'll make yourself look worse and worse, and eventually your fan base is going to catch on, and it'll end very badly for you and maybe your channel. I don't know, it depends. I may not like you that much, but I don't want to see you go down such a bad path. I just hope that you understand that you make mistakes, and the best thing you can do is actually listen for once. This isn't a new thing for you. This has been happening for years, ever since your initial channel, and I don't want you continuing it. That's all.
Okay, I'm not particularly a fan of the way Koda's been responding to the community either, but to complain about how she keeps coming back is a bit disingenuous, since if you look at every time she's responded to the SCC this year, it's been to a video on her. She started on this warpath when me and Foxwell commentated on our Has-Been Hotel review, where she was very upset about some of the comments that were left on my video, then started claiming that the SCC was demonizing her for the review, even though some of the people who were criticizing her, like the Names Junkie, weren't even a part of the community, but details. However, she later apologized for snapping at people and tried to wipe her hands of the situation by deleting every tweet and comment she made about it, while not apologizing for any of the points she made and still continued to push the idea that the SCC was out to get her, but again, details.
The next time she responded to someone in the CC was Toganium, who made a response to her video on Fuchsia Butters. Regardless of either com's quality, Koda is allowed to respond to a video criticizing her, which would justify her interaction with us again. Then there was a video on Manga Common where two commentators, Lunatic the Game and Doodle Tones, publicly stated that they didn't like the video, and again, regardless of her video's quality, she is responding to them because they said something about her or her content.
Now, with that said, I agree the way Koda responds to the SCC members is rather hypocritical, like the way she responded to me in Night Eye's review by making a joke that totally wasn't meant to start drama about how the SCC harps on her, only to prove that was a farce at best by legitimately claiming that we were doing just that. And for as often as she likes to complain about me comments about her, she's awful quick to make them towards other people, such as how her now-deleted comment on my Has-Been Hotel review claimed that I wasn't as brain-dead as the other trash-bin hotel fans. And when people called her out for being condescending, she claimed that backhanded statement was apparently supposed to be her giving me the benefit of the doubt, all while not explaining how I missed her points, despite essentially saying I'm brain dead. Okay, point is, the problem here is with the way Koda responded to this, and not the fact she dared respond to criticism at all. If anything, it's rather unfair to criticize someone for merely responding to the criticisms they get when the critics were the ones who initially seeked her out. So this just comes off as, oh my gosh, just shut up when we respond to you, which is really not a good mindset to have when giving critique, since they're shutting out any potential possibility that your points may be wrong.
I think it has become a pet peeve of mine when someone's final thoughts tell their target to improve without any concrete advice for improvement. Like, the most I could take from this is that Koda is very defensive about her content and reacts poorly to criticism. As Lex has shown, this has been a recurring pattern, but nothing in your final thoughts provides a better alternative to this behavior despite speaking against it. Don't do the bad thing is not as simple as you make it out to be.
Well, that's it for both the main degrees we're covering, so...
If I may, I do have some final thoughts for Koda. Aside from the general advice of pay closer attention and wise men say fools rush in and all that jazz, there's a more personal issue that hasn't been fully addressed. The way you react when on the receiving end of criticism, I believe is just as important as how it is delivered, especially if you want to send such critique in return. Validity aside, it can be difficult for some people to hear objections to almost every argument you've made. I know I didn't initially take it well when I first had a thorough response to one of my commentaries. Harsh criticism is to be expected at times, but that's not to say you should view the points against you as if you were Principal Skinner.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
It sucks to hear others say what you've made is bad or what you said is wrong, and hey, maybe they're right. It helps to look at both sides of the coin. See how much weight you and your critics have in these discussions. If the opposition takes issue with something, perhaps try and see why that may be the case. Empathy is not just a social tool, but an argumentative one. Without it, we probably wouldn't be able to try and understand how person A came to conclusion B, or what a pattern of behavior could mean. It's more than merely being attentive. It's about where your focus is spent, and solely doing so to find, say, weak spots on the enemy forgets other things like the skills or stratagems they possess, what is at their disposal, or even what you have to combat them and how, if that metaphor makes sense. Taking whatever you can into account and weighing your options is essential for when it comes to criticism in any aspect, and what I believe is paramount to paving your way to improvement, however long and bumpy a road that may be.
Now, I was originally going to focus my final thoughts on Umbrus to try and balance things out, but after the script was finished, Koda did some things that, as I stated earlier in this video, made me view this situation in a much worse light. You see, after Koda's video got backlash, she proceeded to unlist her video because the SCC wouldn't learn anything, which, I've already gone on that tirade, I'm not going on it again. And then she stated she was quitting response commentaries because they're pointless and cause unnecessary drama. Now, on its own, that last part is fine. Having your main form of content being debating and covering drama can get pretty draining after a while, and I'd understand Koda wanting to distance herself from that content since it got her put in the center of her own dramas. That being said, for someone who's against content that causes pointless drama, that didn't seem to stop her from immediately badgering a certain artist on Twitter over a My Hero Academia take. Basically, Hitin Mitsuru said she was sick of people calling her an Endeavor apologist when they stan other villains of the show, and then Koda came in, poking and prodding Hitin into a debate that she clearly was not interested in having, as shown by her dismissive remarks towards Koda. Eventually, she admits she liked Endeavor getting a redemption arc, where the two had a back and forth on it for a while, where Koda was stating that he should have died and proceeded to double down on calling her an Endeavor apologist. And then the argument continued to go on until Koda implied that Hitin knew nothing about abuse, despite how Hitin herself was in an abusive relationship before. Reminder, the person who quit commentaries over pointless drama is going out of her way to pick a fight over a fictional character, and then proceeded to cross a major line while doing so. At that point, the problem isn't with the commentaries, but rather Koda seeking out things to complain about. And conveniently after that happened, that's when Koda decided to delete her Twitter and YouTube videos and left a goodbye video talking about how upset she was, how she didn't feel her content was good enough, and most importantly, not apologizing to Hitin for what she said to her. Now, if Koda wants to move on from this, then fine. I still think she owes Hitin an apology, but fine. I genuinely hope she's happy with whatever she chooses to do. However, the reason I still wanted to go through with this video after all of this is because there's a couple lessons to be learned from here that should be learned by anyone wanting to get into commentaries, or even people who just want to get in arguments on the internet in general. One, if you're basing your YouTube channel off of commentaries, a genre that's based on going out of your way to critique people, be prepared for a bunch of other people to disagree with you. Nobody's perfect and everyone will make a flop every now and then. I understand it can be disheartening to have several people criticizing you. However, if you're going to insert yourself into a situation so you can dish out criticism, then it's expected you take it as well. Or if you disagree with said criticism, then that leads us towards lesson number 2. The way you respond to criticism is important. You don't have to agree with it, nor do you have to sugarcoat every point you have against it, but at the very least you should be civil and not make broad assumptions about people, whether it be a fan of Endeavor, a fan of Hazbin Hotel, or a community of commentators.
Well then, I think that about does it. And hey, all the glitching stopped.
I think you mean most of it stopped.
Maybe if I just... There. I'll sort that out later.
Brilliant solutions, Zenny.
Hey, I don't see you coming up with any bright ideas.
Well, that's on you for assuming I was bright to begin with.